The most expensive mistake a powerful man can make is believing another human being is beneath him. The laughter arrived before the champagne. It rolled across the rooftop terrace of the Sterling Grand Hotel like a wave, blending with the soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers and the distant glow of Charleston Harbor beyond the glass railing. Hundreds of feet below, the city shimmered beneath a warm spring sky. Above, the elite of the East Coast moved through the exclusive gathering with effortless confidence. Billionaires, investors, politicians, and heirs to old fortunes exchanged stories over crystal glasses and seven-figure deals. At the center of it all stood Nathan Sterling. Tall, confident, and impossibly composed. He looked exactly like the financial magazines that regularly featured him on their covers. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly. His silver watch probably cost more than most people earned in a year. At 38, Nathan had built a reputation as the man who never lost. Not in business, not in negotiations, not in life. His closest friends often joked that he treated the world like a chessboard and everyone else like pieces. Tonight was no different. "You know what your problem is?" said one of the men standing beside him. "You are bored." The group laughed. Nathan took a sip of bourbon and smiled. "That is not a problem. It is when you start looking for entertainment in all the wrong places." Another round of laughter followed. Nathan leaned against the railing and looked across the harbor. "You all act like boredom is dangerous. For you, it usually is. Remember Monaco?" someone added. "Or the helicopter incident? Or buying an entire company because you dislike the CEO?" The group erupted again. Nathan simply shrugged. "All reasonable decisions." His friends shook their heads. The conversation shifted toward relationships, marriages, and divorces. Several men complained about complicated engagements. One spoke about a pending settlement. Another described an expensive breakup. Nathan listened quietly before finishing his drink. "That is exactly why I stay out of all that." "You mean because commitment terrifies you?" "No," Nathan replied. "Because most people make marriage far more complicated than it needs to be." Easy for a billionaire to say. "No," Nathan said calmly. "Easy for someone who understands people." One of his friends raised an eyebrow. "You understand people? Better than most. Then prove it." The challenge immediately caught everyone's attention. Nathan smiled slightly. "How?" "Pick any woman in this hotel." The man gestured toward the ballroom behind them. "Convince her to marry you." More laughter followed. Nathan remained unfazed. "That would not be difficult." "See," another friend interrupted. "That arrogance is exactly what we are talking about." "It is not arrogance if it is true." The group groaned. "Then prove it," someone repeated. "Anyone?" Nathan asked. "Anyone? No conditions?" "None." His friends exchanged amused glances. Then one of them pointed toward the restaurant level visible through the glass elevators below. "Fine. Not someone from our world." Nathan followed the direction. "What do you mean?" "Someone with no connections. No social status. No wealthy family. No elite education. Someone completely outside your universe." Nathan looked down toward the lower level of the hotel where guests were finishing dinner. Servers moved gracefully between tables. Managers coordinated staff. Tourists admired the waterfront view. Then his eyes settled on one woman. She was carrying a tray of drinks through a crowded section of the restaurant. Unlike everyone around her, she appeared completely unaffected by the luxury surrounding her. Focused, calm, efficient. She moved with quiet confidence. "What about her?" Nathan asked. The group looked down. "The waitress." "Exactly." More laughter erupted. "Now that would be interesting." "You cannot be serious." "Why not?" Nathan asked. "Because she would never belong in your world." Nathan continued watching her. She never looked up, never noticed the wealthy men staring from above. She simply continued working. "You are wrong," he said. "Anyone can belong anywhere." "So you think you could marry her?" Nathan smiled. "I know I could." "How much?" someone asked. The terrace suddenly grew quieter. Nathan glanced at the group. "How much what?" "The bet." There it was. The challenge. The thing none of them truly expected him to accept. For a moment, only the music filled the air. Then Nathan slowly set down his glass. $1 million, he said. Several people nearly choked on their drinks. "You are insane." "Probably." "And if you lose?" Nathan's smile widened. "I do not lose." The men burst into laughter again. The bet was made. Hands were shaken. Jokes were exchanged. The conversation moved on. But Nathan did not. His attention remained fixed on the woman below. A few minutes later, the elevator carried him down to the restaurant level. The atmosphere changed immediately. Gone were the investors and luxury speeches. Here there were families celebrating birthdays, couples sharing desserts, and tourists enjoying the waterfront view. Nathan moved through the room unnoticed until he stopped beside a table near the windows. The waitress approached with a polite smile. "Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" For the first time, Nathan looked directly into her eyes. Deep brown eyes. Intelligent eyes. Not intimidated. Not impressed. Just curious. Her name tag read, Ava Bennett. Nathan extended his hand. "Actually," he said, "I think I might need something much bigger than dinner." Ava glanced at the hand but did not shake it. "That sounds expensive." Nathan smiled. "It probably is. Then I am definitely not the person you need." She turned to leave. But Nathan's next words stopped her. "What if I told you I want to marry you?" The restaurant noise continued around them. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed. Yet for one brief moment, the world seemed to stand perfectly still. Ava Bennett had heard strange things from customers before. She had listened to drunken proposals, impossible business ideas, and promises that disappeared by the next morning. But nothing in her 29 years had prepared her for a billionaire looking her in the eye and calmly suggesting marriage between appetizer orders. For a moment, she simply stared at Nathan Sterling. The restaurant continued moving around them. A waiter carried plates toward a nearby table. A child laughed near the window. Someone ordered another bottle of wine. Everything felt normal except for the man standing in front of her. Ava blinked once, then twice. "That is not funny," she said. Nathan smiled. "I am not joking." "Good." She adjusted the tray in her hand. "Because that would have been a terrible joke." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away. Nathan watched her disappear into the dining room. Most people reacted differently when they met him. Some became nervous. Others became excited. Many immediately recognized his name. Ava had done none of those things. She had dismissed him like an inconvenience standing between her and her next table. The realization amused him more than it should have. Upstairs, his friends waited for updates. When Nathan returned to the rooftop terrace, laughter immediately erupted. "Well," someone shouted. "Did she say yes?" Nathan poured himself another drink. "Not exactly." The group burst into applause. "I knew it. Nathan Sterling finally found someone immune to money. This is historic." Nathan ignored them. "The conversation is not over." It looked pretty over from where we were standing. More laughter followed. Nathan simply smiled. He had spent his entire life overcoming obstacles. One waitress was not about to become an exception. Meanwhile, Ava finished her shift shortly after midnight. The spring air felt cool against her skin as she stepped outside the hotel. Charleston's historic streets glowed beneath old-fashioned streetlights. She walked toward her aging sedan parked 3 blocks away and thought about the strange encounter. Part of her wanted to forget it immediately. Another part found it oddly irritating. Not because Nathan had proposed. Because he had delivered the statement with complete confidence, as though every person in the world existed on a shelf waiting to be selected. Ava had spent years dealing with wealthy people. The hotel attracted plenty of them. She recognized entitlement when she saw it. And Nathan Sterling wore it like an expensive cologne. By the time she reached home, she had almost stopped thinking about him. Almost. The small house sat in a quiet neighborhood 15 minutes from downtown. It had belonged to her grandmother for decades. The paint needed attention. The porch leaned slightly to one side. But it was home. Ava quietly entered through the front door and found the living room lamp still glowing. Her grandmother sat asleep in a recliner beneath a blanket. Medical paperwork covered the nearby coffee table. Ava's expression softened instantly. She carefully gathered the documents and reviewed them. The numbers had not improved. If anything, they looked worse. Hospital balances, prescription costs, specialist appointments. Her grandmother's heart condition had become increasingly expensive to manage. Ava worked overtime whenever possible, but the bills seemed to grow faster than she could pay them. She stared at the paperwork for several minutes before quietly carrying everything into the kitchen. The next morning began like most others. Coffee, bills, work, responsibility. Ava had long ago learned how to keep moving forward regardless of circumstances. That determination had carried her through college, through personal disappointments, and through every financial challenge that followed. Few people knew she possessed an MBA from a respected university. Even fewer knew she had once dreamed of leading a company. Life had simply taken a different path. Around noon, the restaurant manager approached her during a slower period. "There is someone here asking for you." Ava looked up. "Who?" "You are not going to believe me." Her stomach immediately sank. Seconds later, Nathan Sterling entered the dining room. Several employees nearly dropped what they were carrying. Customers whispered. A few recognized him instantly. Nathan walked directly toward her. "Good afternoon." Ava sighed. "You cannot be serious." "I am. You own half the city." "Not half." "Close enough." Nathan smiled. "Can we talk?" Ava folded her arms. "Why?" "Because I would like 5 minutes." "You already had 5 minutes." "Then give me 6. Against her better judgment, the joke almost made her smile. Almost. She led him toward a quiet corner near the back of the restaurant. Nathan sat across from her. For the first time since meeting him, his expression became slightly more serious. "I know this sounds unusual. That is one word for it. But I want you to hear me out." Ava leaned back in her chair. "Fine." Nathan nodded. "I need a wife." Ava immediately stood up. Conversation over. "Wait." She paused reluctantly. "Why?" Nathan considered the question. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Because appearances matter in my world." That might be the worst reason for marriage I have ever heard. "Probably." Ava shook her head. "Then why would I ever agree?" Nathan looked directly at her. "Because I can solve every financial problem you currently have." The words landed harder than he intended. Ava's expression changed instantly. The warmth disappeared. The room suddenly felt colder. "You investigated me?" Nathan remained silent. That was answer enough. Ava slowly rose from her chair. "Get out." "Ava, get out." Her voice remained calm. That was what made it powerful. Nathan stood as well. "You do not understand." "No," she replied quietly. "I understand perfectly." Then she looked him directly in the eye. "You think because you know what I owe, you know what I am worth." For the next 3 days, Nathan Sterling stayed away. No unexpected visits. No phone calls. No messages. Ava assumed the strange chapter had finally ended. She returned to her routine, working double shifts whenever possible and spending evenings helping her grandmother manage medications, appointments, and bills that seemed determined to multiply overnight. Yet life had a way of testing people precisely when they believed they had regained control. On Thursday afternoon, Ava arrived home to find her grandmother sitting silently at the kitchen table. A stack of documents rested beside her untouched cup of tea. The older woman's expression immediately told Ava something was wrong. "What happened?" Ava asked softly. Her grandmother slid the paperwork across the table. Ava scanned the pages. The specialist they had been waiting months to see had finally approved a treatment plan. Normally, that would have been good news. Then she reached the final page and saw the projected cost. Her stomach tightened. The number seemed unreal. She read it twice, then a third time. Even working every available hour, she would need years to save that amount. The room became painfully quiet. "I am sorry," her grandmother said gently. "Do not." Ava immediately sat beside her. "You never apologize for being sick. I hate that you carry all of this." Ava smiled despite the fear rising inside her. "We will figure it out." She had repeated those words many times over the years. Usually she believed them. This time was harder. The following morning, Ava arrived at work early. The restaurant had not yet opened. Sunlight streamed through the waterfront windows while employees prepared for lunch service. She was reviewing inventory sheets when her manager appeared beside her. "There is someone waiting in the office." Ava did not need to ask who. A few moments later, she stepped inside and found Nathan standing near the window overlooking the harbor. Unlike their previous encounters, he looked unusually serious. "I told you to stay away." Nathan nodded. "You did. And yet here you are." "Because this conversation matters." Ava crossed her arms. "To you." Nathan studied her expression carefully. "To both of us." Ava almost laughed. "You still do not understand." "Then help me understand." For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ava exhaled slowly. "You walked into my life and treated it like a business transaction." Nathan remained silent. "You investigated my family." "Yes." "You looked at my problems and assumed money gave you the right to solve them." Nathan lowered his eyes briefly. "I know how that sounded." "No," Ava shook her head. "You know how it sounds now." The honesty in her voice struck him harder than anger would have. Nathan stood quietly before speaking again. I'm not good at asking for things. That is obvious. To her surprise, he smiled faintly. Then his expression became serious once more. But I am asking now. Ava waited. Have dinner with me. She stared at him. That is your grand solution? One dinner. Why? Nathan looked toward the harbor before answering. Because every person I know already expects something from me. His voice was calm. Every conversation has an agenda. Every relationship is connected to money, status, influence, or business. Ava remained skeptical. Nathan continued. You were the first person in years who looked at me and saw a problem instead of an opportunity. The statement caught her off guard. For the first time since meeting him, she saw something beneath the confidence. Not weakness. Loneliness. It disappeared almost immediately, hidden behind the polished image he wore so well. Dinner, Ava repeated. That is all. That is all. Ava should have said no. Every instinct told her to refuse. Yet another part of her was curious. Not about his wealth. About the man hiding behind it. One dinner, she finally said. Nathan smiled. One dinner. The restaurant manager nearly dropped a tray when he learned she had agreed. News traveled quickly through the staff. By evening, everyone seemed to have an opinion. Ava ignored all of them. The next night, Nathan arrived precisely on time. Instead of taking her to one of the exclusive restaurants he owned, he drove to a small seafood cafe nearly 30 miles outside the city. The place overlooked a quiet stretch of coastline. No reporters, no executives, no luxury crowd, just ocean waves and weathered wooden tables. Ava noticed immediately. This is not what I expected. Nathan pulled out a chair for her. That makes two of us. During dinner, something unexpected happened. They talked. Not about business. Not about money. About childhood memories. Family traditions. Favorite books. Mistakes. Dreams abandoned and dreams still waiting. Hours passed almost unnoticed. Ava found herself laughing more than she intended. Nathan found himself listening more than he usually did. By the time they stepped outside, moonlight shimmered across the Atlantic Ocean. A cool breeze carried the scent of salt water through the night air. For a moment, they stood silently beside the shoreline. Then Nathan looked at her. I want to make you an offer. Ava immediately groaned. There it is. Nathan laughed softly. At least here at first. Ava turned toward him. The ocean stretched endlessly behind them. Fine. Nathan took a breath. Marry me for 1 year. The sound of the ocean seemed to disappear for a moment. Ava stared at Nathan as the waves rolled quietly against the shoreline behind him. Moonlight reflected across the water, turning the Atlantic into a field of silver. Somewhere in the distance, a boat horn echoed through the night. Yet all she could hear were the words he had just spoken. Marry me for 1 year. She blinked slowly. You really need to stop opening conversations that way. Nathan laughed despite himself. I was hoping that line would sound better the second time. It did not. That is fair. Ava folded her arms and looked out toward the ocean. You realize normal people date first. I am beginning to understand that. And normal people definitely do not propose contract marriages after seafood. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. I suppose that is also true. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ava turned back toward him. Why? Nathan's expression became serious. Gone was the playful confidence. Gone was the billionaire who always seemed to have a clever answer ready. Because my company is entering a difficult period. Ava frowned. What does that have to do with marriage? Nathan leaned against the railing overlooking the beach. Sterling Holdings is still profitable, still powerful, but perception matters in my world. You keep saying that. Because it is true. He paused. Investors trust stability. Boards trust stability. The media trusts stability. Right now, I look like a man who has everything except a life. Ava raised an eyebrow. That sounds ridiculous. Most billion-dollar decisions are. To her surprise, the answer sounded honest rather than arrogant. Nathan continued. The board wants me to appear settled. Married. Yes. And you decided to solve that problem by selecting a waitress. Nathan immediately looked uncomfortable. That is not what happened. Really? Really? Ava studied him carefully. For the first time, she sensed that his answer was genuine. Nathan looked away toward the ocean. I chose you because you are different from everyone I know. You barely know me. Maybe. His eyes returned to hers. But every person in my world is trying to become something. More powerful. More connected. More important. His voice softened. You already know who you are. The statement caught her off guard. She was not accustomed to people noticing things like that. Most customers saw a waitress. Most wealthy guests saw service staff. Very few bothered to look deeper. "You are still asking me to marry a stranger," she said. "For 1 year. That does not improve the proposal." Nathan smiled faintly. Then he reached inside his jacket and handed her a folder. Ava looked down suspiciously. "What is this?" "Information. That sounds dangerous." "Probably." Reluctantly, she opened it. Inside was a formal proposal. Legal terms. Financial arrangements. Living arrangements. Public appearances. Everything was carefully organized. Ava read silently for several moments. Then her eyes stopped moving. One section detailed medical support. Another outlined long-term care funding. Another addressed housing assistance for family members. Nathan watched her expression carefully. "Your grandmother would receive treatment from the best specialists available." Ava immediately closed the folder. "No," Nathan looked surprised. "You have not finished reading." "I do not need to." She handed it back. "I am not marrying someone because I am desperate. That is not why I am asking." "It feels that way." The wind moved softly through her hair as silence settled between them. Finally, Nathan nodded. "Then I will not ask again tonight." Ava looked relieved. "Good. I will ask tomorrow." For the first time all evening, she laughed. A real laugh. The sound surprised both of them. Nathan smiled. "There it is." "What?" "The smile." Ava shook her head. "You are impossible." "I have been told that." They eventually returned to the city. Nathan drove her home without mentioning the proposal again. The conversation shifted to ordinary things. Favorite movies. Terrible restaurants. Childhood stories. By the time they reached her neighborhood, the tension had faded. Yet the folder remained on the seat between them like a silent reminder. Ava carried it inside after all. She told herself she only wanted to review the details. Nothing more. The next morning, reality returned quickly. Her grandmother's condition had worsened overnight. A routine appointment became an emergency consultation. New tests were ordered. New costs appeared. By afternoon, Ava sat alone in a hospital waiting room staring at numbers she could not solve. Exhaustion settled heavily across her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt trapped. Not because she lacked determination. Because determination could not reduce medical bills. Determination could not create money that did not exist. When her phone vibrated, she almost ignored it. Almost. The message came from Nathan. It contained only one sentence. "No pressure. No conditions. If you need help, call me." Ava stared at the screen. Then she looked through the waiting room window toward the fading sunlight outside. She hated the situation. Hated the impossible choices standing in front of her. Most of all, she hated that part of her was beginning to consider the proposal. Not because she wanted luxury. Not because she wanted status. But because the people she loved needed something she could no longer provide alone. 3 days later, Nathan received a phone call while reviewing reports in his office high above downtown Charleston. He recognized the number immediately. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt genuinely nervous before answering. "Hello." Silence filled the line for a moment. Then Ava's voice arrived quietly. 1 year. Nathan stood slowly from his chair. "What?" 1 year, she repeated. "After that, we go our separate ways." The city skyline glowed beyond the glass walls behind him. Nathan looked out across the harbor. "Are you saying yes?" Another brief silence followed. "I am saying we need to discuss the details." Nathan smiled despite himself. For the first time since making the reckless bet on the rooftop, something inside him felt unexpectedly different. Victorious was not the right word. Neither was excited. The feeling was stranger than either of those. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being a game. The wedding took place 6 weeks later beneath a sky so clear it seemed painted across the Charleston waterfront. Luxury yachts rested in the harbor. White roses lined the aisle. Reporters waited behind designated barriers while guests from the worlds of business, politics, and old money filled the rows of elegant chairs. To everyone watching, it looked like a modern fairy tale. A billionaire marrying a beautiful woman from a completely different world. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Even fewer understood how complicated that truth had already become. Ava stood in a private room overlooking the water while a stylist made final adjustments to her dress. The gown was stunning. The room was stunning. The view was stunning. Yet none of it felt real. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Just 2 months earlier, she had been carrying trays through crowded dining rooms and worrying about overdue medical bills. Now she was preparing to marry one of the most powerful men in the country. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her grandmother entered slowly, her health visibly improved thanks to the treatments already underway. Tears immediately filled the older woman's eyes. "You look beautiful." Ava smiled softly. "You always say that." "Because it is always true." They embraced carefully. For a moment, neither spoke. Then her grandmother pulled back slightly. "Tell me something honestly." Ava knew what was coming. "What? Do you trust him?" The question lingered in the room. Ava thought about Nathan's confidence, his flaws, his kindness that appeared unexpectedly when nobody was watching, the loneliness she had seen beneath his polished image. "I do not know yet," she admitted. Her grandmother nodded. "That is an honest answer." Meanwhile, across the property, Nathan adjusted his tie while several executives and friends prepared for the ceremony. The atmosphere should have felt celebratory. Instead, something unsettled him. His friends treated the event like a victory, like a challenge completed, like proof that Nathan Sterling could accomplish anything. Their laughter irritated him more than usual. "You should be smiling," one of them said. "You won." Nathan looked up. "Won what?" "The bet." Silence immediately followed. The word felt wrong now. Uncomfortable. Smaller than it had on the rooftop. Weeks earlier, another friend laughed. "Do not tell me you are getting sentimental." Nathan did not answer, because for the first time, he realized he had stopped thinking about the wager entirely. The ceremony began shortly afterward. Music drifted across the waterfront as guests rose from their seats. When Ava appeared at the end of the aisle, a visible ripple moved through the crowd. Conversation stopped. Even those who had arrived expecting gossip suddenly fell silent. She carried herself with a grace that money could never buy. Calm, composed, dignified. Nathan watched her walk toward him and experienced something unexpected. Pride. Not because she was becoming his wife, because she looked completely unafraid. The vows were simple, respectful, careful. When the officiant pronounced them married, applause echoed across the harbor. Cameras flashed. Champagne flowed. Smiles appeared everywhere. Yet beneath the celebration, another story had already begun. During the reception, Ava met dozens of people from Nathan's world. Investors, board members, socialites, politicians. Most were polite. Some were genuinely welcoming. Others barely disguised their judgment. One woman in particular made no effort at all. Victoria Langford arrived nearly an hour late. Tall, elegant, and impossibly confident, she moved through the crowd like someone who believed the entire event belonged to her. Ava noticed the reaction immediately. Conversations shifted. Eyes followed her. Even Nathan's expression changed slightly. "Who is she?" Ava asked quietly. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Victoria." "Just Victoria?" "Trust me. That is enough." Before he could elaborate, Victoria approached. Her smile looked perfect from a distance. Up close, it felt colder. "Nathan." "Victoria." The greeting carried years of history. Victoria's eyes slowly shifted toward Ava. For several seconds, she simply stared. Then she smiled again. "So this is her." Ava extended her hand politely. "Nice to meet you." Victoria glanced at the offered hand before ignoring it completely. "I admit," she said, "you are not what I expected." Ava lowered her hand calmly. "Neither are you." The response caught Victoria off guard. Nathan nearly smiled. Victoria recovered quickly. "Well, welcome to the family." Her voice sounded pleasant. Her eyes did not. "You are going to find this world very different from waiting tables." Several nearby guests suddenly became interested in their drinks. Ava understood exactly what had happened. The insult had been delivered with surgical precision. Public enough to embarrass. Polite enough to deny. She could have responded. She could have fought back. Instead, she smiled. "Then it is a good thing I learned quickly." For the first time all evening, Victoria's confidence faltered. Only slightly. But Nathan noticed. Ava noticed. And somewhere deep beneath the music, the champagne, and the glittering lights of the harbor, the first crack appeared in a world that had already decided exactly who Ava Bennett was supposed to be. Ava's new home overlooked nearly 40 acres of manicured coastline. The Sterling estate sat on a bluff above the Atlantic, surrounded by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss and protected by gates taller than most houses. On paper, it was a dream. In reality, It felt like moving into a museum where every object had been carefully positioned long before she arrived. 2 weeks after the wedding, Ava still felt like a visitor. Every morning she woke before sunrise out of habit. While the rest of the mansion remained quiet, she wandered through hallways lined with expensive artwork and family portraits that seemed to watch her pass. Staff members treated her respectfully, but she sensed their curiosity. Some wondered how long she would last. Others simply could not understand why Nathan Sterling had married a woman who had spent most of her life balancing trays and working double shifts. Ava ignored the whispers. She had spent years being underestimated. It no longer bothered her. One Monday morning, she sat alone in the breakfast room reviewing medical updates from her grandmother's specialists when Nathan entered carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee. "You are working already?" he asked. Ava glanced at the clock. "It is 6:30. "Exactly." She smiled faintly. "Some people actually wake up before noon." Nathan laughed. "I walked right into that one." He sat across from her and opened several reports on his tablet. Within seconds, his expression darkened. Ava noticed immediately. "Bad news." Nathan rubbed his forehead. "Nothing I cannot handle." "That usually means bad news." He looked up. "You are learning." For a moment, he seemed hesitant. Then he turned the screen toward her. Charts and projections filled the display. Most people would have seen numbers. Ava saw patterns. Declining margins. Delayed contracts. A supply chain issue affecting one of Sterling Holdings' largest divisions. She studied the information quietly. "How long has this been happening?" Nathan blinked. "You understood that." "You asked a question." "No, I mean the reports." Ava lowered the tablet. "Nathan, I have an MBA." Silence filled the room. Nathan stared at her. "You have what?" "An MBA." "From where?" She named the university. Nathan nearly dropped his coffee. "Why are you working as a waitress?" Ava shrugged. "Life happened." The answer sounded simple, but Nathan sensed the years hidden behind it. Before he could ask more questions, his phone rang. Within moments, he was heading toward a board meeting downtown. Yet the conversation lingered in his mind. All day, he found himself thinking about it. That evening, while executives debated solutions inside Sterling Tower, Ava remained at the estate. Curiosity eventually drew her toward the business reports Nathan had accidentally left behind in the breakfast room. She told herself she was only looking. Nothing more. An hour later, she sat surrounded by spreadsheets and quarterly forecasts. The problem became obvious. Sterling Holdings had invested heavily in a distribution partnership that was quietly underperforming. The numbers looked healthy from a distance. Up close, they were bleeding money. Ava reviewed everything twice to be certain. Then she organized several pages of notes and left them on Nathan's desk. She never expected anything to come from it. The next afternoon, Nathan stormed into the estate carrying a folder. Not angry, shocked. "Did you do this?" he asked. Ava looked up from the library sofa. "Do what?" He dropped the notes onto the table. "Between them, these recommendations. I made a few observations." Nathan stared at her. "A few observations?" His voice rose slightly. "Do you realize that your analysis identified a flaw my executive team missed for 6 months?" Ava blinked. "Really? Really?" She looked down at the papers. "I thought it was obvious." Nathan laughed in disbelief. "You thought it was obvious?" For the first time since meeting her, he looked genuinely unsettled. Not because she had impressed him, because she had shattered an assumption he did not realize he had been carrying. Ava was supposed to be the inexperienced outsider struggling to adapt to his world. Instead, she had just outperformed people earning 7-figure salaries. The realization followed him into the following week. Meanwhile, another person was paying close attention. Victoria Langford arrived at Sterling Tower on Thursday afternoon. She still maintained strong relationships with several board members and frequently appeared at company functions despite her history with Nathan. As she entered a conference room, she overheard 2 executives discussing recent developments. "Who found the problem?" one asked. "Nathan's wife." Victoria stopped walking. "Excuse me." The room immediately grew quiet. One executive cleared his throat. "Nothing important." Victoria smiled politely. But inside, something cold shifted. For years, she had assumed Ava Bennett would become a temporary distraction, a passing curiosity, a mistake Nathan would eventually correct. Now she was hearing a different story, a more dangerous story, one involving influence, competence, and attention from people Ava never intended to become involved in Sterling Holdings. Her original agreement with Nathan had been simple. 1 year. Public appearances. A temporary marriage that solved problems for both of them. Yet life rarely respected contracts. Over the following month, her observations continued finding their way into conversations. Sometimes Nathan would mention a challenge over breakfast. Sometimes she would notice an inefficiency while reviewing public reports left around the estate. More than once, her suggestions quietly saved executives weeks of work. The strangest part was that Ava never seemed impressed by any of it. She approached billion-dollar problems the same way she once approached a crowded restaurant during a dinner rush. Identify the bottleneck. Fix the bottleneck. Move forward. Nathan found the simplicity fascinating. One evening, long after sunset, he returned home later than usual. The estate sat wrapped in coastal fog while waves crashed softly against the cliffs below. Most of the lights were off. As he entered the library, he expected to find the room empty. Instead, Ava sat curled into a leather chair near the fireplace. A thick business report rested on her lap. Nathan paused. You read annual reports for fun? Ava looked up. Do you own any books that are not about business? Probably. Then somebody hid them very well. Nathan laughed and loosened his tie. For a few moments they simply talked. Not as participants in an arrangement. Not as people fulfilling obligations. Just two individuals sharing a quiet evening. The conversation drifted from business into childhood memories. Nathan described summers spent at boarding programs his father insisted would build character. Ava described helping her grandmother run neighborhood fundraisers and church events. The contrast between their worlds could not have been greater. Yet somehow the differences made the conversation easier. By the time midnight approached, neither seemed eager to leave. The realization unsettled Nathan more than he expected. The next morning, Sterling Holdings faced another challenge. A major acquisition involving a technology logistics company had entered dangerous territory. Executives filled conference rooms. Lawyers reviewed contracts. Financial analysts projected risks across multiple markets. The deal represented hundreds of millions of dollars. If it failed, investors would notice immediately. Nathan spent the entire day at headquarters. Shortly before 6 o'clock, frustration filled the executive floor. The numbers no longer aligned. Something about the acquisition felt wrong, yet nobody could identify the exact problem. During a brief break, Nathan called the estate. He did not even realize why. Until Ava answered. How is the crisis? She asked. Nathan blinked. How did you know there was a crisis? You only call before dinner when something is wrong. For a moment, he smiled. That is disturbingly accurate. He explained the situation. Ava listened quietly. Then she asked 3 questions. Simple questions. Direct questions. Questions nobody in the boardroom had considered. Nathan stopped speaking halfway through her 3rd question. Wait. Silence followed. Nathan, say that again. Ava repeated the observation. Nathan immediately ended the call and returned to the conference room. 2 hours later, the answer appeared. The acquisition target had been hiding a long-term liability inside a subsidiary division. The oversight would have cost Sterling Holdings an enormous amount of money. Instead, the deal was suspended before completion. The following day, several executives wanted to know who identified the issue. Nathan surprised himself with his answer. My wife. The room became silent. Some looked confused. Others looked skeptical. A few appeared annoyed. Nathan did not care. Across town, Victoria Langford cared very much. News traveled quickly among influential circles. By the end of the week, she heard the same story from 3 different sources. Ava Bennett had not merely survived. She was becoming respected. Victoria hated that fact. One rainy afternoon, she arranged a charity luncheon attended by socialites, executives, and media personalities. Ava received an invitation shortly afterward. The gesture appeared friendly. Nathan immediately distrusted it. You do not have to go. Ava looked at the invitation. Why? Because Victoria never does anything without a reason. Ava smiled faintly. That sounds exhausting. Trust me, it is. Yet she attended anyway. The luncheon took place inside a historic Charleston ballroom overlooking the harbor. Crystal chandeliers illuminated perfectly arranged tables, while local reporters documented every arrival. The moment Ava entered, she felt dozens of eyes follow her. Most people smiled politely. A few whispered behind champagne glasses. Victoria greeted her warmly enough to fool anyone unfamiliar with. Her. I am so happy you came. Ava returned the smile. Thank you for inviting me. Of course. Victoria guided her toward a table near the center of the room. Then, over the next 2 hours, subtle attacks arrived one after another. Questions about etiquette. Questions about education. Questions about social circles. Questions designed to remind everyone exactly where Ava came from. Each one arrived wrapped inside perfect manners. Each one intended to embarrass. Ava answered calmly, respectfully, without anger, without defensiveness. By the end of the event, something unexpected happened. People stopped focusing on her background. They started listening to her ideas. When discussions shifted toward community investment programs, Ava spoke with the confidence of someone who actually understood working families. The room responded immediately. Several executives asked follow-up questions. 2 nonprofit leaders requested meetings. Even reporters began taking notes. Across the ballroom, Victoria watched the conversation transform. What began as an opportunity for humiliation had become something else entirely. Admiration, respect, influence. For the second time in her life, Victoria Langford found herself losing control of a narrative she believed belonged to her. And for the first time, she began to understand that Ava Bennett represented far more than an inconvenient wife. She represented a threat. By the beginning of autumn, something had changed inside the Sterling estate. The transformation was subtle enough that outsiders rarely noticed it, yet impossible for Nathan to ignore. Ava no longer felt like a temporary guest. Staff members sought her advice. Community leaders requested meetings with her. Even several board members who had once questioned her presence now spoke about her with respect. What surprised Nathan most was how naturally it had happened. She had never demanded influence. She had earned it. One evening, after returning from a charity planning session, Ava found herself alone in the estate while Nathan attended a private gathering with several investors. Rain drifted softly across the coastline outside. The mansion felt unusually quiet. She spent the evening organizing community outreach proposals before eventually heading toward Nathan's home office in search of a document she needed for an upcoming foundation project. He had given her access weeks earlier. There was no secrecy between them anymore. At least that was what she believed. The office sat at the far end of the second floor, overlooking the ocean. Ava located the file quickly. As she prepared to leave, her attention shifted toward a storage cabinet, standing partially open near the desk. A folder rested on the floor beneath it. She bent down automatically and picked it up. The cover contained no label, no title, just a collection of loose documents and photographs. She intended to place it back where it belonged. Then a familiar date caught her eye. The date of their wedding. Confused, she opened the folder. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Guest lists, venue notes, event schedules. Then she found a printed photograph. It showed Nathan standing on the rooftop terrace of the hotel on the night they first met. Several men surrounded him holding drinks. Everyone appeared to be laughing. Ava stared at the image for several seconds before turning to the next page. Her heartbeat slowed, then accelerated. A signed agreement rested beneath the photograph. It was informal, almost childish. Several signatures appeared at the bottom. One belonged to Nathan. The heading read, $1 million challenge. Ava felt the room become very still. She continued reading. Each line struck harder than the last. The agreement described a wager made among friends. The objective was simple. Nathan Sterling would convince a waitress from the hotel restaurant to marry him within 6 months. The winner would receive $1 million and permanent bragging rights. Ava read the page twice. Then a third time. Her hands began to tremble. The sound of rain tapping against the windows suddenly seemed deafening. She lowered herself into a chair because her knees no longer felt steady. For months, she had tried to understand how a billionaire had noticed her, why he had persisted after rejection, why he had entered her life so aggressively. Now the answer sat in her hands. It had never been destiny. It had never been admiration. It had never been the beginning of an extraordinary love story. It had started as entertainment, a game, a challenge, a bet. Tears threatened to appear. She refused them. Instead, she kept reading. Additional notes revealed conversations among the men. Jokes, predictions, casual remarks about how quickly the challenge would succeed. One sentence seemed to burn into the page. She is perfect because nobody will believe she belongs there. Ava closed the folder immediately. Silence filled the office. Not the peaceful silence she had grown to love at the estate. A colder silence. A heavier one. Every memory suddenly looked different. The proposal, the wedding, the introductions, the attention, the promises. Had any of it been real? The question hurt more than the discovery itself. Nearly an hour later, headlights appeared outside. Nathan had returned home. Ava heard the front door open downstairs. Heard his footsteps. Heard him greeting staff members. Normally, she would have walked down to meet him. Tonight, she remained seated in the darkness. When Nathan eventually entered the office, he stopped immediately. Ava sat beside the window overlooking the storm. The folder rested on the desk between them. Nathan's expression changed the instant he recognized it. Color drained from his face. For the first time since she had known him, he looked afraid. Neither spoke. The storm outside intensified. Rain streaked across the glass. Finally, Nathan took a step forward. Ava. His voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. Ava looked at him calmly. There were no tears. No raised voice. No dramatic confrontation. Only disappointment. Deep, immeasurable disappointment. How much did you win? She asked quietly. Nathan stopped moving. The question seemed to strike harder than any accusation could have. Ava looked down at the folder, then back at him. $1 million? Her voice remained perfectly steady. Was that what my life was worth? For several seconds, Nathan could not answer. The storm outside continued battering the windows while silence filled the office. Ava remained seated near the darkened glass, her expression calm in a way that frightened him more than anger ever could. He had imagined many possible outcomes if the truth emerged. He had imagined shouting, tears, accusations. What he had never imagined was disappointment. The quiet devastation in her eyes made him realize how completely he had failed her. Ava, he said softly, please let me explain. She looked at him for a long moment. Explain what? Her voice remained steady. The part where my life became entertainment? Nathan lowered his eyes. It started that way. The words escaped before he could stop them. The instant he said them, he regretted it. Ava nodded slowly. Not surprised. Not shocked. Just confirmed. Thank you for being honest. Nathan took another step forward. But it did not stay that way. When did it change? The question struck him immediately because he knew the answer. Somewhere between the first dinner and the wedding. Somewhere between her laughter on the coastline and the countless conversations that followed. Somewhere between admiration and love. Yet none of those answers mattered now. I do not know exactly when, he admitted. I only know that it did. Ava looked out toward the storm. That is convenient. Nathan flinched. She stood and walked toward the desk. The folder remained between them like evidence presented in a courtroom. Do you know what hurts the most? She asked quietly. Not the bet. Nathan remained silent. It is the fact that I almost believed it was real. The words landed heavily. Ava continued before he could respond. For months I'd offended you. She laughed softly, though there was no joy in it. Even when people warned me. Nathan's chest tightened. You have every right to be angry. I am not angry. That answer somehow felt worse. Ava looked directly at him. I am finished. The room became perfectly still. Nathan stared at her. Finished. The agreement was for 1 year. Her voice remained calm. I intend to honor it. Ava, after that, I leave. Nathan felt something cold settle inside him. For the first time since becoming one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, he felt completely powerless. The following weeks passed. Beneath a strange new reality. Ava remained polite, respectful, professional. Yet the warmth that once filled the estate had vanished. Conversations became shorter. Smiles became rare. She fulfilled every obligation required by their agreement, but nothing more. The change affected everyone. Staff members noticed. Friends noticed. Most of all, Nathan noticed. Every room suddenly felt larger. Every dinner felt quieter. Every victory felt meaningless. Meanwhile, Ava focused on work. If she could not control her emotions, she could control her future. She devoted herself to foundation projects, community partnerships, and strategic planning initiatives connected to Sterling Holdings. The more she worked, the less time she spent thinking about disappointment. Her reputation continued growing. Board members increasingly requested her participation in meetings. Investors respected her judgment. Employees trusted her. Without realizing it, she had become one of the most influential voices connected to the company. Victoria noticed as well. Unfortunately for her, attempts to undermine Ava only continued strengthening Ava's position. Every rumor collapsed. Every criticism failed. The woman Victoria wanted everyone to dismiss kept proving herself valuable. One afternoon, nearly 2 months after the discovery, Sterling Holdings faced its largest challenge yet. A major competitor launched an aggressive campaign designed to destabilize investor confidence. Market analysts predicted significant losses. News outlets amplified concerns. Stock prices began falling. Executives scrambled for solutions. Emergency meetings filled entire days. Nathan barely slept. One evening, exhausted after another 12-hour strategy session, he returned to the estate and found Ava reviewing market reports in the library. He hesitated before entering. She glanced up briefly. "How bad is it?" "Worse than expected." Ava studied the documents on the table. "Your response strategy is too defensive." Nathan blinked. "What?" "You are reacting instead of leading." She pointed toward a chart. "Investors are nervous because nobody is telling them where the company is going." Nathan sat down across from her. For the next hour, they discussed strategy. Not as husband and wife. Not even as friends. Simply as two intelligent people solving a problem. By the end of the conversation, Nathan realized something uncomfortable. Ava had once again identified solutions his executive team had missed. The next morning, several of her recommendations were implemented. Within days, investor confidence stabilized. The crisis began easing. Headlines shifted. Analysts changed their forecasts. Sterling Holdings recovered. Once again, Ava had helped save the company. Yet she never sought recognition. Never requested credit. Never mentioned it publicly. That humility impressed people more than any achievement could have. A week later, Nathan attended a private board meeting. As discussions concluded, one senior director remained seated. The man had worked with Sterling Holdings for nearly 30 years. "Can I give you some advice?" Nathan nodded. "Of course." The director looked directly at him. "You keep trying to win back your wife with explanations." Nathan remained silent. "Stop explaining. What should I do instead?" The older man smiled sadly. "Become the man she thought you already were." Later that evening, Nathan stood alone on the balcony overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. The same ocean where he had once proposed a one-year marriage. The same ocean where he believed everything was under control. Far below, waves crashed against the shoreline. Behind him, lights glowed softly inside the estate. Somewhere in those rooms, Ava was preparing for a future that no longer included him. And for the first time, Nathan understood something the bet had never taught him. Some losses could not be fixed with money. Some victories were not victories at all. And some mistakes cost far more than $1 million. Winter arrived along the Charleston coast with crisp mornings, silver skies, and a sharp ocean wind that swept across the Sterling estate. Nearly 10 months had passed since the wedding. Only 2 months remained before the agreement expired. Ava knew the date without checking a calendar. Nathan knew it too. Neither mentioned it. The silence surrounding that approaching deadline seemed to follow them everywhere. Yet while their personal relationship remained fractured, Sterling Holdings was entering one of the most important periods in its history. The company was preparing for a massive shareholder summit that would determine the direction of several major investments. Executives from across the country would attend. Analysts would be watching. The media would be everywhere. Success could strengthen the company's future for years. Failure could weaken investor confidence overnight. Unfortunately, another problem had emerged. Victoria Langford had spent months quietly building support among a group of influential shareholders. Publicly, she remained graceful and supportive. Privately, she was preparing a challenge. Ava first sensed something was wrong during a planning session at headquarters. Several executives who normally supported Nathan seemed unusually cautious. Questions became sharper. Discussions became tense. One presentation was interrupted repeatedly by concerns that appeared coordinated. By the end of the meeting, Ava noticed something Nathan seemed too exhausted to see. Someone was creating instability from inside. That evening, she reviewed public filings and shareholder communications from her office at the estate. Patterns began emerging. Certain investors had suddenly aligned their positions. Several voting blocks had shifted. More importantly, many of those shareholders maintained long-standing relationships with Victoria's family. Ava leaned back in her chair and stared at the screen. The situation was becoming clear. This was not simply about business. It was personal. The following morning, she traveled to headquarters earlier than usual. The city skyline reflected against the glass exterior of Sterling Tower as employees filled the lobby. Inside the executive conference room, Nathan reviewed briefing materials for the upcoming summit. He looked tired, more tired than she had ever seen him. Ava placed a folder on the table. "You have a problem." Nathan looked up. "I am aware." "Not that problem." He frowned and opened the folder. As he reviewed the contents, his expression changed. "Where did you get this?" "Public information." "You found all of this from public information?" Ava nodded. Nathan laughed softly. "Sometimes I forget how dangerous that brain of yours is." She ignored the compliment. "Victoria is building a coalition." Nathan's smile disappeared. "I suspected as much." "No." Ava pointed toward the documents. "You suspected opposition. This is something different." Nathan continued reading. By the time he reached the final page, silence filled the room. "She wants influence over the company." "More than influence." Ava met his eyes. "She wants control." Over the next several weeks, tensions increased. Board members received competing proposals. Investors received conflicting messages. Rumors spread throughout financial media circles. Yet every attempt to undermine Sterling Holdings encountered the same obstacle. Facts. Ava had spent months helping strengthen operations, community partnerships, and investor transparency. The company was performing better than it had in years. Numbers did not support the negative narrative being pushed. That reality frustrated Victoria. One afternoon, she finally decided to confront the issue directly. A private board gathering took place at an exclusive country club overlooking the harbor. Senior executives, directors, and major shareholders attended. Ava arrived quietly beside Nathan. Conversations immediately shifted. Some people smiled. Others exchanged curious glances. Victoria approached moments later. Elegant as always. Confident as always. Yet there was tension beneath the surface now. During the meeting, discussions remained civil until a shareholder questioned recent strategic decisions. Victoria seized the opportunity immediately. "Perhaps," she said smoothly. "The company has become distracted." The room grew quiet. "Distracted how?" asked one director. Victoria smiled politely. "By allowing individuals without relevant experience to influence important decisions." Several eyes moved toward Ava. The implication was obvious. The room waited. Nathan opened his mouth to respond, but Ava spoke first. "That is a fair concern." Victoria appeared surprised. Ava remained calm. "Experience matters." She stood and walked toward the presentation screen. Fortunately, results matter too. For the next 15 minutes, she reviewed operational improvements, investment performance, risk reduction strategies, and community initiatives implemented during the previous year. Every statement was supported by data. Every conclusion supported by measurable outcomes. By the time she finished, the room had changed. The skepticism Victoria hoped to create had evaporated. Several directors applauded quietly. One major investor laughed. "I think that answers the question." Nathan watched the scene in silence. Pride filled his chest. Not because Ava had defended herself, because she had done it with dignity. No insults, no revenge, no humiliation, just excellence. Victoria's expression remained perfectly controlled. But for the first time, defeat flickered behind her eyes. The meeting ended shortly afterward. As attendees departed, one senior board member approached Ava. He had spent nearly 4 decades helping guide Sterling Holdings. His opinion carried enormous weight. "I have a question," he said. Ava smiled politely. "Of course." The older man looked around the room, then lowered his voice slightly. "Have you ever considered joining the board?" Ava froze. Across the room, Nathan heard the question. So did several directors nearby. Silence followed, because everyone suddenly realized the same thing. The waitress they once expected to disappear had become one of the most respected voices in the company. And for the first time, people were no longer asking whether she belonged inside the empire. They were beginning to wonder whether she might someday lead it. The question followed Ava for days. "Have you ever considered joining the board?" On the surface, it sounded like a professional opportunity. In reality, it represented something much larger. Months earlier, the same people had viewed her as an outsider. Now some of the most influential voices in Sterling Holdings were asking whether she belonged among the individuals shaping its future. Ava did not answer immediately. She spent the following week focused on work, community projects, and her grandmother's continued recovery. Yet, everywhere she went, the question lingered quietly in the background. Meanwhile, Nathan found himself watching a transformation he never expected. Board members sought Ava's perspective before major meetings. Senior executives requested her input on strategic decisions. Investors listened when she spoke. The respect she had earned was no longer informal. It had become institutional. One evening, as the sun disappeared beyond the Atlantic and painted the horizon in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan found Ava standing on a terrace overlooking the ocean. The wind moved gently through her hair, while waves rolled against the shoreline below. For several moments, he simply stood beside her in silence. "You should accept," he finally said. Ava did not look away from the water. "Accept what?" "The board position." A faint smile appeared. "You sound very certain." Nathan nodded. "Because I am." Ava folded her arms. "You realize how strange this is." "What part?" "A year ago you found me carrying trays in a restaurant." Nathan winced slightly at the reminder. "A year ago, I was an idiot." Ava laughed softly despite herself. The sound felt rare now. Valuable. Nathan turned toward her. "You earned every bit of this." His voice carried a sincerity that could not be questioned. "Nobody gave it to you." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ava looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" The question carried deeper meaning than either wanted to acknowledge. Nathan understood immediately. He answered honestly. "Because it is the right thing." Ava studied him carefully. Months ago, she would have doubted that answer. Now she was not so sure. The man standing beside her no longer resembled the billionaire who treated life like a game. Somewhere along the way, consequences had changed him. Unfortunately, not everyone welcomed those changes. Across Charleston, Victoria Langford faced a reality she could no longer ignore. Her efforts to diminish Ava had failed repeatedly. Worse, each attempt seemed to strengthen Ava's reputation. Investors admired her. Employees respected her. Directors trusted her. Victoria's frustration grew with every passing week. Finally, she made a mistake. Believing she still possessed enough influence to sway key shareholders, Victoria organized a private gathering intended to rebuild support. Unfortunately for her, several attendees had already begun questioning her motives. During the event, one investor raised concerns about repeated efforts to undermine company stability. Another questioned why Victoria remained so focused on attacking a woman whose contributions were increasingly obvious. The conversation quickly shifted away from her expectations. By the end of the evening, Victoria realized something she had never imagined possible. She was losing credibility. News of the gathering reached Sterling Holdings within days. More importantly, it reached the board. During a special session, directors reviewed recent events and discussed the company's future. As the meeting progressed, a remarkable pattern emerged. Nearly every major success of the previous year contained Ava's fingerprints. Operational improvements, investor confidence initiatives, community partnerships, strategic recommendations, crisis management solutions. One director finally summarized what everyone else had begun realizing. "We keep discussing whether Ava belongs here," he said. "Perhaps we should be discussing how much we owe her." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of recognition. Nathan sat quietly throughout the conversation. Pride mixed with regret inside him. Pride because Ava's achievements were undeniable. Regret because he remembered exactly how this story had started. He remembered the rooftop terrace, the laughter, the arrogance, the bet. By the time the meeting ended, one conclusion had become unavoidable. Ava Bennett was no longer connected to Sterling Holdings because she had married Nathan Sterling. She mattered because she had proven her value repeatedly. The distinction was important. Outside the boardroom, winter slowly began giving way to spring. Flowers returned to the estate gardens. The ocean breeze grew warmer. And with every passing day, the expiration date of the marriage moved closer. One afternoon, Ava sat alone in the library reviewing documents when a messenger delivered an official envelope. She opened it carefully. Inside was a formal invitation. The board of Sterling Holdings was offering her a seat. Full voting rights. Full participation. Full authority. Ava read the letter twice. Then she looked out the window toward the ocean. A year earlier, she had agreed to a marriage because she felt trapped by circumstances. Now one of the most powerful companies in the country was inviting her to help lead its future. The irony was impossible to ignore. Yet as she held the letter in her hands, another realization emerged. For the first time since discovering the truth about the bet, Her future no longer felt connected to Nathan's decisions. It belonged entirely to her. And somewhere deep inside, that realization felt like freedom. The final month of the agreement arrived quietly. There were no dramatic announcements, no countdowns marked on calendars. Yet everyone closest to the situation seemed aware that something significant was approaching. Spring sunlight returned to Charleston. The gardens surrounding the Sterling estate bloomed with color. The ocean beyond the cliffs reflected endless shades of blue. From a distance, life appeared peaceful. Beneath the surface, everything was changing. Ava accepted the board position. The decision became official during a special meeting attended by directors, investors, and senior executives. When the vote concluded, approval was nearly unanimous. Several people applauded. Others smiled with genuine admiration. Nathan sat quietly at the far end of the table. Pride filled him, but so did something heavier. He knew exactly what the moment represented. Ava had achieved this entirely on her own. Nobody could claim otherwise. After the meeting, reporters gathered in the lobby hoping for comments. Cameras flashed as board members exited the building. Questions filled the air. To everyone's surprise, Ava stepped forward and answered them with calm confidence. She spoke about responsibility, opportunity, and the importance of creating pathways for people who were often overlooked. Her words spread quickly through financial media. By evening, articles appeared across the country. Most focused on her remarkable rise. Some called her inspiring. Others called her transformative. For Nathan, the coverage felt bittersweet. He remembered the first night he saw her carrying a tray through a crowded restaurant. He remembered the arrogance that brought him downstairs. Looking back, the memory felt almost unrecognizable. Several days later, Sterling Holdings hosted its annual shareholders summit. It was the largest corporate event of the year. Thousands attended in person. Thousands more watched online. Industry leaders, journalists, investors, and analysts filled the convention center. The atmosphere felt electric. Nathan stood backstage reviewing notes for his keynote address while executives prepared presentations. Across the hall, Ava spoke with community leaders invited to discuss partnership initiatives. The contrast between them struck him. Once, he had believed power came from control. Ava had taught him that influence came from trust. Shortly before the event began, Nathan made a decision, one he had been avoiding for months. He walked toward the media relations office and requested a live statement be added to the afternoon agenda. The staff looked confused but complied. By late afternoon, the main auditorium was filled. Cameras rolled. Investors watched attentively. Nathan stepped onto the stage and approached the podium. The presentation began normally. Financial performance, strategic growth, market forecasts. Then he stopped. The room grew quiet. Nathan looked across the audience. Board members sat in the front rows. Executives watched from reserved sections. Ava sat several rows back beside community partners and nonprofit leaders. Before we conclude, Nathan said, there is something I need to address. The atmosphere changed instantly. Reporters lifted their heads. Cameras adjusted focus. Nathan took a slow breath. A year ago, I made the worst decision of my life. Silence filled the auditorium. Not because it cost money. Not because it damaged my reputation. His voice remained steady. Because it damaged someone who deserved better. Across the room, Ava froze. Nathan continued. He spoke about arrogance. About treating life like a competition. About mistakes disguised as confidence. Without revealing private details, he publicly accepted responsibility for choices that had hurt another person. He did not make excuses. He did not seek sympathy. He simply told the truth. When he finished, silence remained for several seconds. Then scattered applause began. Not because people admired the mistake. Because they recognized accountability. Nathan stepped away from the podium and returned to his seat. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. Later that evening, after the summit ended and guests departed, Ava stood alone on a terrace overlooking the harbor. City lights shimmered across the water. A soft breeze carried the scent of the ocean through the night. Footsteps approached behind her. She already knew who it was. Nathan stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, he looked out toward the harbor. I do not expect forgiveness, he said quietly. Ava remained silent. I do not expect another chance. The honesty in his voice felt different now. Real. Earned. I only wanted the truth to belong to me instead of rumors. Ava watched the lights reflecting across the water. Then she nodded slowly. Not acceptance. Not reconciliation. Something quieter. Respect. The contract would end in a few weeks. Both of them knew it. Yet standing there beneath the Charleston sky, Nathan finally understood something that changed everything. Whether Ava stayed or left was no longer the point. The real question was what she would choose to do with the future she had built. And for the first time, the answer belonged entirely to her. SUA 1 year later, Charleston welcomed another spring. The harbor shimmered beneath clear skies. The streets buzzed with tourists and business travelers. Life moved forward, just as it always did. Yet for Ava Bennett, everything had changed. The contract had ended 11 months earlier. She had left the Sterling estate quietly, without drama and without bitterness. She took only what belonged to her and stepped into a future she had built herself. The decision surprised many people. Some expected her to fight for more. Others expected her to return to a simpler life. Instead, she did something nobody predicted. She accepted responsibility. As a board member, she helped guide Sterling Holdings through one of its strongest years in company history. Community investments expanded. Employee retention improved. New partnerships flourished. Investors celebrated record performance. More importantly, thousands of families benefited from programs Ava championed personally. The woman once dismissed as a waitress had become one of the most respected leaders in American business. On a bright April morning, Sterling Holdings held its annual shareholder assembly. The event attracted executives, journalists, investors, and community partners from across the country. Cameras lined the entrance. Reporters discussed market expectations. Inside the convention center, anticipation filled the air. This year's meeting carried unusual significance. Several senior leadership changes were expected. Rumors circulated throughout financial media. Nobody knew exactly what would happen. Ava arrived shortly before the meeting began. She wore a tailored navy suit and carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had always defined her. As she entered the building, conversation slowed. Not because she was controversial, because she was admired. Across the lobby, Nathan Sterling watched her arrival. A year had changed him as well. The arrogance that once defined him had faded. Experience had replaced certainty. Humility had replaced pride. He still led Sterling Holdings, but people now described him differently. More thoughtful. More grounded. More human. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Both smiled. Not the smile of romance. Not the smile of people pretending the past never happened. The smile of two individuals who had survived difficult truths and emerged stronger because of them. The assembly began shortly afterward. Financial reports were presented. Strategic initiatives were reviewed. Future projections received overwhelming support. Then came the final item on the agenda. A recommendation from the board. The chairman stepped to the podium and addressed the audience. This year, we recognize a leader whose vision has transformed not only our company, but also our understanding of what leadership should look like. Applause filled the room. Ava looked genuinely confused. The chairman smiled. The board unanimously recommends the appointment of Ava Bennett as Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Holdings. For a moment, silence replaced applause. Then the room erupted. Investors stood. Directors smiled. Employees cheered. Cameras flashed across the ballroom. Ava remained seated, stunned. Nathan joined the standing ovation first. The gesture carried more meaning than any speech. He applauded longer than anyone. Not because he was losing power, because he knew exactly who had earned it. Several minutes later, Ava finally approached the stage. Emotion shimmered behind her eyes. She looked across the audience. Then she began speaking. A long time ago, I believed success meant proving people wrong. The room listened carefully. But life taught me something better. Her voice remained calm. The greatest success is proving yourself right. More applause followed. She spoke about dignity, opportunity, hard work. She thanked mentors, colleagues, employees, and communities who believed in possibility. Yet she never mentioned revenge. She never mentioned humiliation. She never mentioned the bet. Because the story was no longer up.